This video is not going to tell you that Freddie Mercury was a better singer than John Lennon. It is not going to tell you that Queen were a better band than the Beatles. Those are arguments without resolution, and they are not the argument here. What this video is going to tell you is something more specific and more verifiable. That on two nights in July 1986, at Wembley Stadium in London, Freddie Mercury and Queen did something that the Beatles, despite being, by most reckonings, the most important band in the history of rock music, never did and never could have done. They stood in front of 72,000 people and conducted them. Not performed for them, conducted them. The crowd moved when Freddie Mercury asked it to move. It sang what he asked it to sing. It clapped in the specific rhythm he gave it and held the silence when he gave it silence and erupted when he released it. 72,000 people twice in the same week, in complete and responsive communion with a single performer on a stage. And the Beatles, who had done Shea Stadium, who had done the Cavern and the Rooftop and every legendary room in between, had never come close to this specific thing. This is not a diminishment of the Beatles. It is the accurate description of what Queen did at Wembley in 1986 that nobody had done before and that nobody has done in the same way since. The Beatles played Shea Stadium on the 15th of August, 1965. 55,600 people, the largest audience a rock group had ever played to at that point in history. The significance of Shea Stadium is not in question. It was a genuinely historic moment. The first large stadium rock concert, the proof that popular music could fill the largest venues in America. But the specific conditions of the Shea Stadium concert reveal a limitation that is important for understanding what made Wembley 1986 different. The Beatles could not hear themselves at Shea Stadium. The sound technology of 1965 was not capable of delivering adequate monitoring to the stage at that volume and that scale. The crowd's noise, the specific continuous roar of 55,000 people in a state of hysteria, drowned out the music for the performers. John Lennon has described playing at Shea Stadium as essentially playing by memory rather than by ear. They knew the songs, they knew what they were doing, but the feedback loop between performer and audience that live music depends on was severed. The crowd was receiving something. The Beatles were not receiving anything back from the crowd. The circuit was not complete. The circuit between performer and audience, the live feedback loop in which the performer shapes the performance in real time, according to what the crowd gives back, requires both sides to hear each other clearly. The Shea Stadium circuit was incomplete because 1965 technology could not sustain it at that scale. The Wembley 1986 circuit was not only complete, it was the most fully realized version of itself that stadium rock had ever produced. By 1986, Freddie Mercury could hear the crowd, and the crowd could hear him with a clarity Shea Stadium never had. And Freddie Mercury's ability to use that circuit to read the crowd, give it what it needed at each moment, create and release tension across a stadium show, was the product of 16 years of performing at every level, from pub rooms to arenas to stadiums. Shea Stadium was 55,000 people in 1965. The Beatles could not hear themselves. The crowd was screaming continuously, and the music was lost inside the noise. And the circuit between performer and audience that live music requires was not complete. Wembley 1986 was 72,000 people. Freddie Mercury could hear everything, and the crowd could hear him, and what happened between them was the complete circuit, the fully realized version of the thing that Shea Stadium had pointed toward but could not achieve. The Beatles showed that a stadium could be full. Queen showed what a full stadium could do. The specific moment at Wembley 1986 that most completely demonstrates what Queen did that the Beatles never could is not the most famous moment. It is not Bohemian Rhapsody or We Are the Champions. It is Radio Gaga and the choreography Freddie Mercury taught 72,000 people in real time, from a stage, in the middle of a concert. Radio Gaga contains a clap sequence, the double clap in the verses. At Wembley, Freddie Mercury asked the crowd to do it with him. 72,000 people did it, together, in time, spontaneously, without rehearsal, without instruction beyond the gesture he made from the stage. A field of 72,000 people moving in the same rhythm at the same moment, conducted by a single person with his hands. The Beatles at Shea Stadium could not have done this because the technology did not exist to make the circuit work at that scale. And because the skill of conducting a stadium crowd in real time was something Freddie Mercury had spent 16 years developing. The vocal call and response Freddie Mercury performed with large crowds is documented across multiple Queen concerts and described by everyone who witnessed it as unlike anything else in rock performance. Freddie Mercury singing a phrase, the crowd singing it back, the phrase extending across several exchanges, the crowd following without hesitation. This is not a trick. It requires reading a crowd of tens of thousands in real time, calibrating the phrase to what they can receive and repeat, extending or shortening the exchange based on the energy it generates. At Wembley in July 1986, on 2 consecutive nights, he performed this with 72,000 people. The crowd was not passively receiving a performance. It was performing. Freddie Mercury had made it perform. This is what the Beatles at Shea Stadium could not do, not because of any limitation in them, but because 1965 did not allow it, and the skill required had not yet been developed in anyone. 72,000 people are not a crowd at a Freddie Mercury concert. They are an instrument. This is the specific way that the people who were at Wembley in July 1986 have described the experience. Not as watching a concert, but as being part of one, being used, being played, being part of the music rather than a recipient of it. The distinction matters because it is exactly the distinction between what the Beatles did at Shea Stadium, where the crowd was present and devoted and historically significant, but essentially passive, because the circuit was broken, and what Queen did at Wembley, where the crowd was actively incorporated into the performance, was given a role and a function, was invited to participate in the making of something rather than simply to witness it. Freddie Mercury understood crowds as instruments. He understood that the specific quality of a large crowd's response, its sound, its rhythm, its timing could be shaped from the stage in the same way that a musician shapes the sound of their instrument. And at Wembley in July 1986, he played the instrument of 72,000 people with the same completeness and the same precision that Brian May played the Red Special. The result was something that the Beatles in 1965 or in any year never produced in a stadium. Not because they were lesser artists, because this specific art had not yet been invented when Shea Stadium happened, and Freddie Mercury was the person who invented it. The crowd at Shea Stadium watched the Beatles. The crowd at Wembley 1986 was played by Freddie Mercury. That is the whole difference. Not a quality difference, a kind difference. The Beatles created the stadium concert. Queen transformed it into something that had not existed before. A stadium where the audience was not the audience, but the instrument, and the performer was not the performer, but the conductor. Nobody had done this before Wembley. Nobody has done it in quite the same way since. The 2 Wembley concerts of July 1986 were not simply 2 performances of the same show. They were 2 instances of the same extraordinary thing, separated by 24 hours. The second night carried the knowledge that what had happened the first night was repeatable, which gave it a quality that amplified rather than repeated the first. Brian May has said the 2 Wembley nights were the greatest concerts Queen ever played. Not Nebworth, which was larger. Not Live Aid, which was more famous. The 2 Wembley nights back-to-back. The Beatles never had 2 consecutive nights like this. Not because they were lesser, because what happened at Wembley 1986 could only happen in 1986. With the technology and the skills and the specific person who had spent 16 years learning to do it. Paul McCartney has described Freddie Mercury as one of the greatest live performers who ever lived. He has cited the Live Aid performance as defining what live music could be. This is the accurate recognition from someone who had been at the center of live music for 20 years before Wembley, of the specific quality of what Freddie Mercury had developed. McCartney at Shea Stadium in 1965 could not hear himself playing. Freddie Mercury at Wembley in 1986 could hear everything, knew everything, used everything. Both things can be true simultaneously. Shea Stadium is the founding moment, and Wembley 1986 is its fullest realization. Both are necessary for the story to be complete. It is important to be precise about the role of technology in this comparison. Because the argument is sometimes made that the difference between Shea Stadium and Wembley 1986 is simply a technology difference, that any band with the benefit of 1986 sound technology could have done what Queen did. This argument is wrong, and the proof of its wrongness is the evidence of 1986 itself. Every major band in the world had access to the same sound technology in 1986 that Queen had. Not every major band produced what Queen produced at Wembley. The technology was necessary but not sufficient. What was sufficient was Freddie Mercury, the specific combination of his vocal ability, his understanding of crowds, his instinct for the dynamic of a large live audience, and the 16 years of work that had produced all of these. The technology provided the conditions in which the circuit between performer and audience could be complete. Freddie Mercury was what made the completion of that circuit into something extraordinary rather than merely functional. Shea Stadium needed 1986 technology, and it would still have needed Freddie Mercury. Give Shea Stadium the 1986 sound system, and you have 55,000 people who can hear the Beatles clearly. You still do not have Radio Gaga. You still do not have 72,000 people clapping in unison from a gesture. You still do not have the specific thing that Freddie Mercury had spent 16 years learning to do. Technology is what made it possible. Freddie Mercury is what made it what it was. Both things together, in July 1986 at Wembley, produced the one moment when a rock concert became something that no rock concert had ever been before. This comparison matters not to rank the Beatles against Queen, but to illuminate what Freddie Mercury was. He was not simply a great singer or a great performer. He was the most complete realization of what a large live audience could become when the right person was on the right stage with the right technology and 16 years of work behind him. The Beatles created the conditions for Wembley 1986. Without Shea Stadium, there is no line of development that leads to the stadium rock of the 1980s. But what Queen did at Wembley exceeded what the Beatles did at Shea Stadium in the specific dimension of the performer-audience circuit. The person responsible for that excess was Freddie Mercury, not a better musician, a different artist. The artist who completed what Shea Stadium had begun. The footage of the Wembley concerts exists. It has been watched by tens of millions of people. And what the footage shows, if you watch it with the specific attention that this comparison requires, is the circuit in operation. Watch Freddie Mercury's face during Radio Gaga when the crowd does the clap sequence. Watch the specific quality of his attention, the way he is receiving the crowd's response at the same moment as he is conducting it. The way the performance is genuinely responsive rather than simply delivered. Watch the vocal exchange sequences, the phrases going out and the crowd's version coming back, and the adjustment Freddie Mercury makes in real time based on what he received. None of this is choreographed in the sense of being prearranged. It is the live product of someone who knows how to do this specific thing better than anyone else ever has. And then, if you want to understand the comparison with Shea Stadium, watch the Beatles footage from that night, the footage of 4 musicians playing inside a wall of noise, performing to a crowd they cannot hear from a stage the crowd cannot hear from. Both things are historically important. They are not the same thing. The footage from Shea Stadium shows 4 musicians inside a wall of sound. The footage from Wembley 1986 shows one man conducting 72,000 people. Both are historic. They are not the same history. One of them is the beginning. The other is what the beginning was moving toward, what it took 21 years, and the specific person of Freddie Mercury to arrive at. The Beatles showed that a stadium could be full. Freddie Mercury showed what a full stadium could become. That is the comparison. Both halves of it are necessary. On the 11th and 12th of July 1986, at Wembley Stadium in London, Freddie Mercury and Queen played the 2 concerts that represent the fullest realization of what a stadium rock concert can be. Not the largest concert, Nebworth, 1 month later, was larger. Not the most watched Live Aid, 1 year before, was watched by more people. The most complete, in the specific sense of the circuit between performer and audience, being as fully realized as it has ever been. 72,000 people, twice conducted by a single performer who had spent 16 years learning to do what he did at Wembley, and who did it there more completely than he had ever done it anywhere else. The Beatles at Shea Stadium invented the stadium concert. Freddie Mercury at Wembley, 1986, completed it. The invention was necessary. The completion was Freddie Mercury. And the completion was in the one specific dimension of what a performer can do with the people who have come to hear him, bigger than anything the Beatles did in a stadium. That is not a ranking. It is a description of what happened. And what happened has never happened again in quite the same way.